We all know the New York Islanders have to make a trade if they really want to improve this team this offseason. But who are the team's most tradable players and what will it take to trade them? All that and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We have got a busy show today, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles. You can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, including hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, and the draft. If it's happening to the New York Islanders, we'll have you covered here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. And it's great to talk a little Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. We all know that right now the Islanders are not legitimate elite Stanley Cup contenders. They're not a terrible team. They are not a team that, is in the by American Thanksgiving, they're out of the playoffs trying to get the best draft lottery spot in a total tear it down, build it back up mode. That's not where they are. And while some people believe that's where they should be, safe to say, as long as Lou Lamoriello is the GM, that's not where the Islanders are going to be until this team just gets so old that they're just that bad. And I think even then, assuming they have Ilya Sorokin and Matthew Barzal and Bo Horvat, they're probably not going to be one of the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the league anytime soon. But my point is the Islanders are in that messy middle. And they need to get from the messy middle. They need to figure out whether or not they are better off stripping it down and trying to rebuild, which, again, under Lou Lamoriello, very unlikely to happen voluntarily, or if they need to make a move. And to make a move, one of the things that we obviously have to discuss is the salary cap situation. And it isn't looking great right now as far as trying to, if you want to bring in the Islanders need 2 top 6 forwards and a puck-moving defenseman, ideally. That's, they really have 4 top 6 forwards at best. And then, it really becomes a question of, well, who else? How do you get more players? So you have Maxim Tsiplakov, who they signed, entry-level deal, 1-year contract, less than $1 million against the cap. Guy scored 31 goals in the KHL. We'll see how he does in the NHL. But what that signing also did was further restrict the Islanders' cap space. Why? Well, they had a little more than $7 million a year available before signing Tsiplakov. Now, with that deal, you're probably talking about, a little more than $6 million, and you're still going to have to re-sign Simon Holmstrom, Kyle McLean, Mike Riley, maybe Ruslan Ishkakov. If he returns, you're talking about having somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million left at best to try to upgrade the team. And what that means is unless you can sign, two other, similar players to Siplakov, where, you're paying an established guy an entry-level deal, you're unlikely to find goal-scoring help when you only have that little amount of money to play with. And that means you got to trade people away if you want to free up cap space. And believe me, there are a lot of players that a lot of Islander fans have indicated they want to trade away, or perhaps that they should trade away. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about the top 6 candidates to be traded, what the good points and bad points of trading them may be, and how much cap space they would potentially free up. The one guy who I think has dominated the discussion, and it's been more than a year now that this player has been considered a top trade candidate for the Islanders, and that's J.G. Pageau. And you could say, why would you want to trade J.G. Pageau? Well, he's got 2 years left on his deal at a cap hit of $5 million a year. He's a third-line center. I want to make it clear, I like J.G. Pageau, but he's also kind of expendable. Yeah, he's good on faceoffs. Yeah, he's a good penalty killer. Yeah, he gives you everything he's got. I don't think anyone questions the effort of J.G. Pageau, but he hasn't been the same player offensively for the last 2 or 3 years. He's on the wrong side of 30. I don't think he's going to get back near that 20 to 25 goal mark that he had that first season that he joined the Islanders. And let's face it, you have a lot of natural centers on this team. You have Barzal, Horvat, Cizikas, Ishkakov, if he comes back, can play center. McLean is a natural center. You've got a lot of guys who can play down the middle. Brock Nelson is a center. You got guys who you can go 5, maybe even 6 deep, because Siplakov can also play center in a pinch, although he is predominantly a wing. But realistically, you have got a bunch of guys who, can play center. Moving a center makes the most sense. The obstacles to moving J.G. Pageau right now. Number one, another bad season statistically, at least offensively. You're not selling high at this point. And number two, he's earning $5 million a year in a situation where he's not producing at that rate. He would need to find the right team, a team that is looking for a two-way checking kind of a center, probably a contending team who just needs that last steady piece to get them to the next level. And the other thing is he has a modified no-trade clause. So 16 teams you cannot trade him to unless he specifically waives that. Not sure he's going to do that, but we'll see how that plays out. Now, that is, to me, Pageau is the top-rated guy you could possibly trade. The next guy in my mind that's tradable is the captain, Anders Lee. Lee, the thing that he has 2 more years left on his contract. He is earning a cap hit of $7 million. And again, you're not getting the production. You wouldn't be selling a high right now on Anders Lee. He's 33, going on 34. You don't get the feeling that his offensive production is going to return. Right now, you also have a modified no-trade clause with Lee, where he has a 15-team no trade clause, so again, roughly half the league, plus which you're going to have to retain some of that $7 million salary. So unless you're throwing in draft picks, you're not getting full cap relief. But I'll say this, if you could get $4.5, $5 million off the cap and move Anders Lee, that is a deal that I think would make sense for the New York Islanders to try to do if it means they can free up cap space to get a legitimate goal scorer, or, they need more than one, but let's start with one for the top six. Let's see if that's doable. But to me, those are the top two trade candidates. We've got four more to discuss. And again, keep in mind, I am not going to be mentioning guys who just won't save enough cap space to make it worth the while. You want to trade Kyle McLean or Simon Holmstrom, even though, they're both RFAs, but assuming you resign them, or you want to trade Hudson Fasching, there's not enough cap relief to make a dent that, that's why guys like that are not going to be included on the list. Or, Pierre Engvall with 6 years left on his deal, no one's going to touch that contract. That's why he's not on this list. But we'll get to the other four players on the list. Plus, we'll have our player-by-player review of the season and the season to come with Simon Holmstrom. And for our Islanders' birthday of the day, a defenseman who was with the Islanders in their inaugural season, and he holds the distinction of having the worst plus-minus in a single season in NHL history. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all that and a whole lot more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And Islander fans, you could use your knowledge of the NHL to bet on the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, we're down to the final four teams right now. You could bet on who's going to win the Cup outright, who's going to win the Eastern or Western Conference Finals, who's going to win the Conn Smythe Trophy, player props on any given game, or more. Just check out FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, more possible trade candidates. And again, I'm concentrating on guys who could actually free up enough cap space and spots in, the top six in order to help this team improve. So we already mentioned J.G. Pageau and Anders Lee. The next two players I'm going to mention them together, is Ryan Pollock and Adam Pelech. And in my mind, I would only trade one of them. Now, the biggest obstacle to trading either Pelech or Pollock, they both have no trade clauses, just flat out no trade clauses for this coming season. Now, we'll go to a modified no trade clause later in 1 year for Pelech, 2 years more for Pollock. But if you want to deal them this offseason, you've got to get their approval. Can you? Well, if the answer is no, they're not really tradable. You would, however, free up a nice amount of cap space, $6.15 million for Pollock, according to Cap Friendly, $5.75 million for Pelech. As defensemen, they're still 29 years old, so they're just still in their prime. And they are locked up for the foreseeable future. So right now you've got, you know, 5 more seasons of Adam Pelech, and more than that, 6 seasons of Ryan Pollock. That may be something that other teams will shy away from, or, as the cap goes up and NHL salaries go up, maybe the right team, maybe, Winnipeg or Toronto, a team that is looking to bolster its blue line and get it to the next level, would be willing to make that kind of a deal. We'll see. I mean, Ryan Pollock being part of a trade for Nikolai Ehlers, I think that could make sense for both teams. Again, if you're talking about waiving that no trade clause, but a lot of obstacles there. And I think the length of the contract for both of these defensemen is indeed an obstacle toward making a deal. The 5th and 6th players here are guys that I think there's a little more risk involved in trading them, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be considered as trade candidates. Kyle Palmieri, 1 year left, $5 million. He's 33, going on 34. To me, coming off a 30-goal season, Kyle Palmieri's trade value may never be higher than it is right now. Now, he has a 16-team no-trade list. That is a minor obstacle, the modified no-trade. And he's also productive. He stayed healthy this year for the first time, playing in all 82 games in a long time. And if you're trading away Kyle Palmieri, you're trading away one of your 4 legitimate top 6 forwards. But hopefully the guy you acquire is younger. And again, if you trade Palmieri, you'd be trading him when his value, it will probably never be higher. Even if Palmieri gets off to a great start next season and you say, okay, we could trade him at the trade deadline, depending on where we're at, if we can't, sign him to a brief extension, or if we don't want to lose him for nothing, or if we're not in contention, all those possibilities you got to think about. But the problem is that I think he'll be a rental at the trade deadline. His value probably goes down. This off season is probably the time to trade Kyle Palmieri where his value would be the highest. And then the other player on the list that I think is very controversial, and again, is not, you're losing a lot by trading him, but that's Brock Nelson. Nelson, going to be 33 soon, making $6 million a year, has 1 year left on his contract. He has a 16-team no-trade list. So again, you have to overcome that modified no-trade list. But again, with Brock Nelson, he's steady, he's good. To me, if you're trading Brock Nelson, it says that you are open to really retooling this team. You would be taking away, in order to add offense, theoretically, you're trading away your best goal scorer over the last 3 seasons. But if you're really retooling, I think, if you trade away Brock Nelson, you would also want to trade away either Anders Lee or Kyle Palmieri, someone else, where you would get rid of one and bring in 2. And or get rid of 2, one of them not being Palmieri or Nelson, and bring in 2 younger guys who, you can benefit from. So to me, those are the 6 guys I think you would be most willing to part with, and guys who are just most, they would do the most good as far as you would get something in return for them. We'll see what, if anything, Lou Lamoriello does. We know he is always reluctant to deal the guys he considers his core, and that he considers a lot of guys his core. But as I said, based on the cap crunch, based on the age of this team, based on the lack of prospects who are NHL ready in the system, you got to trade away one or two guys to free up cap space to make this team better. Those are my top six. If you have someone who you think belongs in the top six, feel free to email or comment on YouTube or, DM me on X. Let me know. Always interested in hearing from you and happy to read some of your responses on the show, depending on your thoughts. We've got more to get to on today's show. We continue our player-by-player look at the season that was and head to the season coming up. Simon Holmstrom is our topic today. We'll also have our Islanders birthday of the day. Let's see if you could guess who that was. All that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. So we continue our look at the Islanders roster player by player this offseason with Simon Holmstrom. Holmstrom played in 75 games, had 15 goals and 25 points, both of those career highs by a wide margin. Only 14 penalty minutes. He was a +2 on the team, but Holmstrom was also a healthy scratch down the stretch a number of times. His shooting percentage, in his rookie year, 15.4. This year, 20.8. He has an accurate shot. He just doesn't take enough of them. 72 shots on goal in 75 games. Only 19 hits in 75 games. 46 blocked shots. Holmstrom excelled shorthanded, scored 5 shorthanded goals on this team, which is very impressive. He's got good speed. Kind of, was doing better mid-season, I think, than late in the season, where I think his production kind of petered out a little bit. You sort of look at his numbers, and he just went through this pretty long dry spell, really in March and into early April. Didn't do much, played in 3 of the 5 playoff games, did not register a point. Again, Holmstrom is only 22. He'll be 23 later this week. But to me, he is a player who still can grow, still has the ability to get better. I don't think he's reached his prime, but I think he's a limited kind of guy. I think he is a third-line player. Maybe he'll reach 20 goals at some point in his career, but I don't think he's ever going to be a top 6 kind of a guy unless you're putting him in the top 6 the way you put Casey Cizikas in the top 6 or Uncle Leo a few years back in the top 6. Guys who will realistically, be there because you don't have somebody else, or who will try to play a specific role but is not a legitimate top 6 kind of a forward. I like some of the things that Holmstrom does. He's good defensively. He's smart without the puck. But again, I think he's a decent role player, but is not necessarily the kind of guy who you expect on your top 6. Right now, as far as the contract situation is concerned for Simon Holmstrom, he is a restricted free agent, does not have arbitration rights, although the expectation is obvious that Lou Lamoriello will probably bring back Holmstrom at or near the $1 million a year mark. And the question is, do you sign him to a 2 or 3, 4-year bridge contract, or do you go for that dreaded 7-year deal? And, look, at his age, 22, a 7-year deal isn't the end of the world, but at the same time, you only want to sign guys to 7-year deals who are part of your core. And I don't think it makes sense to add Simon Holmstrom for a 7-year deal. Knowing Lou Lamoriello, it wouldn't shock me that he does try to make that move, but we'll see how this plays out this offseason. Again, no arbitration rights for Simon Holmstrom. So as a result of that, you have to expect that, he's not going to get a big raise, and it may be a 1 or 2 year deal at this point, and then you see where he's at in a year or two and whether or not it's worth it to lock him up long term. I would stick with a 1 or 2 year deal. Wouldn't go beyond that right now for Simon Holmstrom, but we'll see what Lou Lamoriello does. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day, and today will be the 76th birthday of former Islanders defenseman Bill Mickelson. Mickelson, a native of Napala, Manitoba, 6 foot, 185 pounds, joined the Islanders after playing with the LA Kings the previous year, and wasn't drafted, but then ended up being an Islander in the expansion draft. Played in 72 games with the Islanders that first season, only missed 6, had 1 goal, 11 points, 45 penalty minutes, and a minus 53 plus minus rating. That was pretty bad. But then, after a year in the minors, he was chosen by the Washington Capitals in the 74 expansion draft. And in 59 games, he set an NHL record with a minus 82 plus minus. Now, Mickelson, not solely to blame for these bad plus minus numbers. The Islanders set a record in their first season in the NHL for the worst record in NHL history in a single season. And then the Capitals broke that record, winning only 8 of 80 games in 74-75. He later played 1 more NHL game for the Caps in 76-77, and that was it for his NHL career. 147 career games, 4 goals, 22 points, 105 penalty minutes. No, he never appeared in a playoff game. Nice guy. Got to interview him for my book, and his son also later played in the National Hockey League, and that was a big deal for Mickelson for sure. And it was great to see him, watch his son in the NHL. That's why he was at the Nassau Coliseum when I got to meet him. One of his better games as an Islander, December 23rd, 1972, at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum when it was still brand spanking new. Islanders hosting the Minnesota North Stars. Cesar Maniago, the goalie for Minnesota. Billy Smith, the goalie for the Islanders. In this game, Bill Mickelson assists on what was the game-winning goal by Brian Spinner Spencer. Ed Westfall also with the assist. That came with a little less than 6 minutes left in the third period. Terry Crisp added an empty netter. Islanders beat the North Stars by a score of 4-2. Bill Mickelson, the assist. He was even in this game, did not record a shot on goal. Billy Smith made only 17 saves to earn the win. Islanders out shooting Minnesota 29-19 in this game. Bill Mickelson, a hardworking defenseman who had the dubious distinction of being the all-time worst minus player in a single season in NHL history. He is our Islanders birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, we'll continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders season that was and the season to come. We'll talk about the captain, Anders Lee. Where does he fit in, if at all, to the Islanders' future? How did he do this season? What was his role? What will his role be if he stays? We're going to break all of that down, plus the latest Islanders news, notes, and happenings. So make sure you join us for that. Until then, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.